Alright, I wanted to start by talking about your actual prompt for tomorrow for Q3. A Q3 essay is a persuasive essay. So you're going to be taking a position on this particular issue. I'm just going to go ahead and read the explanation and give you some examples of pieces of evidence you might want to start gathering in advance. Let me zoom in a little bit. Okay. So, question 3, you're going to have 40 minutes to answer this particular question. 40 minutes of in-class writing. The prompt gives you a little Easter egg right here. So this is information that you can depend on and use in your essay if you feel the need. In her essay, The Ways We Lie, Stephanie Erickson admits that it's not easy to entirely eliminate lies from our lives because they lubricate the daily machinery of living. This is from the Patterns book, which we read the essay in class. However, Erickson goes on to explain that there is a world of difference between telling functional lies and living a lie. Our acceptance of lies becomes a cultural cancer that eventually shrouds and reorders reality until moral garbage becomes as invisible to us as water is to a fish. So she's using a simile here to show us her position on the issue, which is that if we lie too much to ourselves and to each other, if we rely on lies to get through our everyday lives, then eventually we're going to blur the line between lies and truth. Eventually lies will become so natural and innate to us that it'll be just like a fish swimming in water. Humans swim in lies. This is your actual prompt itself. From radio talk to backseat chatter, from corner delis to weblogs, ordinary citizens, political figures, and entertainers lie day in and day out. Examine the belief that lying is a worthwhile social lubricant. So to examine means that you're going to think in depth about the issue, and then you're going to take a position either agreeing or disagreeing with this sentence. Does accepting the fact that lying has a place and a time indicate a moral issue in today's society? Are we reaching the point where lying is becoming one of those cultural cancers that Stephanie Erickson warned us about? So you're either agreeing or you're disagreeing that lying can be useful, or that it has become a cultural cancer, something that we need to fight to survive. Write an essay in which you take a position on the societal effects of lying, supporting your view with appropriate evidence from your reading, your own personal experiences, or your observations. Your reading has really two options, one of which is going to be mandatory. You might decide that you want to incorporate some information from the Patterns essay we read on lying, the different types of lies. You may do that. There should be a Patterns book underneath your desk. So tomorrow, if you would like to be able to reference it, then you may. It'll be open book. You must reference at least somewhere, one time in your paper, Good Country People, which is the short story by Flannery O'Connor. That one is mandatory. You cannot get above a 4 on this essay if you don't incorporate reading Good Country People somewhere in your essay, because it wouldn't be fully answering the prompt. You can also talk about your own personal experiences with lying. So first person, I statements are okay in this essay. And then you might also choose to talk about some observations you have about pop culture or some modern day event that you could relate back to lying and whether lying is okay. So this is your issue that you're going to be writing about. Again, you're going to take a position on one side or the other. It doesn't matter which, as long as you take that position. Now, Good Country People is again the text that was mandatory for you to incorporate somewhere in your discussion. I made a lot of annotations as I was reading it. I annotated for aspects of realism, our current unit of study. I marked when I saw a particularly important issue with regard to feminism, the way that women are treated in this story. So I used the little female character there. Sometimes I saw things in the text like a simile or something that I thought were just important to maybe analyze in the paper at some point. But one of the main things that I want to focus on today, you'll see occasionally in the margins that I wrote in red pen. And anytime I put red pen on the paper, that's because I was talking about one of the categories of lies that was discussed in Stephanie Erickson's essay. For example, the first type of lie I saw was a facade. So we'll talk about these in a little bit more depth in the next couple minutes. I'm going to start back on the first page. I'm on page 1 right now. That's in the upper right-hand corner of your paper. All right, so Flannery O'Connor starts out her story with a description of Mrs. Freeman. Mrs. Freeman is an example of a good country person. She spends a lot of time in this story explaining how Mrs. Hopewell, who is definitely richer, of a different social class, is friends with Mrs. Freeman. And she does that because Mrs. Hopewell is the sort of person who wants people to know that she doesn't think she's better than anybody else. But at the same time, she keeps thinking to herself, oh, I'm so much better than Mrs. Freeman. This must be the nicest house that the Bible salesman has ever stepped foot into. So she's always convincing herself that she is better than other people, but at the same time, she wants to keep people who she sees as underneath her. She wants to keep them in the picture so nobody thinks that she's turning her nose up. Anyway, we start with this description of a good country person, Mrs. Freeman. She uses a simile in describing Mrs. Freeman's expression. She uses a very realistic mode of comparison when she says that she stood there like several grain sacks thrown on top of each other. And then here at the bottom, Flannery O'Connor starts to introduce Mrs. Hopewell, the richer woman, her daughter Joy. Joy had her leg shot off in a hunting accident when she was a young girl. And so, because of modern medicine during this time period, she had to wear a wooden leg. And because of that, because of people's judgment and so forth, she was kind of a recluse. She lived, even though she was in her 30s, she lived in a house with her mom. She never had any sort of romantic relationship. She was well educated, because a wooden leg doesn't stop you from going to school. But her love life was not what maybe the normal love life would be for a person in their 30s. She didn't live alone. She didn't have really any freedom, because her mother had to help take care of her. Now, Joy is referred to by two names in the story, Joy and Huldah. Joy is her given name. Mrs. Hopewell, her mother, named her daughter Joy. But after Joy was involved in the hunting accident, and she got the wooden leg, it really changed her whole perspective on life. And she became somebody who, sort of like her mom, thinks of herself as better than other people. But she thinks of herself as being more intelligent than other people. And she really holds that intelligence over all the other characters in the story. Anyway, I thought it was significant that Flannery O'Connor uses verbs like lumber and slam when she's talking about the way Joy moves around the house. Later on in the story, Flannery O'Connor talks about why Joy chose to change her name legally to Huldah, which is not a very attractive name, Huldah. And she says that she chose it because it was the ugliest sounding name she could possibly think of, and that it matched her perception of her exterior appearance. Joy's the kind of person who likes to draw attention to herself, but at the same time repels the attention away. She draws attention to herself because she lumbers around and stomps her leg, even though she can walk gracefully, but she chooses not to because she wants to kind of get on her mother's nerves. She slams the doors to draw attention, to show her anger with her lot in life. So we have some really intense characterization here on the first page. Two different characters. Throughout the story, I marked with an H and an up arrow the times where Helga is trying to elevate herself above other people, when she's trying to appear smarter and better than other people. One example would be Mrs. Freeman's daughters. On the last page, it talked about how they were named Glenice and Caramay. But in her head, Joy called them Glycerin and Caramel because she thought their names were stupid. And she had better names for them, Glycerin and Caramel. So Helga's just that sort of person. Now, here in the next paragraph on page 2, we see Mrs. Hopewell, the richer lady who thinks she's better than others. She's putting up a facade because she relies on her interpretation of good country people as being innocent and sort of stupid and slow, but genuine and truthful and honest. She relies on that interpretation to characterize all the people around her. She thinks that Mrs. Freeman is just good country people. She thinks that the Bible salesman that comes in her house is just good country people. And so she is immune from seeing the evil that the Bible salesman is trying to perpetrate on the people in the house, because she's so involved in her own idea of what a good country person must be. Later on page 2, we see Helga, not whatever I just said, Helga is ignoring the plain facts. When it comes to dinner conversation, she has to listen to her mother and Mrs. Freeman talk, and she thinks they're talking about simple, stupid stuff that she's above, and so she blocks them out. She has achieved blindness by an act of will and a means to keep it. So she is completely ignoring the facts around her. She's really self-absorbed, just like Mrs. Freeman is, and just like Mrs. Hopewell is, just in different ways. All right. On the next page, we have some more characterization of different people. We have some deep characterization of Helga, using words like ugly, glum, square, and rigid shoulder. So we know a little bit more about her physical appearance and her attitude that goes along with it. On page 4, we see Mrs. Hopewell ignoring the plain fact of Helga's name. Joy, born Joy, changed her name legally to Helga, but her mother refuses to call her Helga because it's ugly, and she uses the word Joy instead at all times. And again, Helga is shown as stumping through the house, making a racket, making it obvious when she's coming and going. Now, Helga operates on a stereotype herself. Again, a stereotype is one of the types of lies in the patterns book. It says she looked at nice young men as if she could smell their stupidity. So she stereotypes the men around her as being dumb and too clueless to interact with her on the level she wishes to interact. So you can see that Helga is in many ways just like her mother. They both think they're better than the people around them, just better in different ways. Miss Hopewell thinks she's more refined and cultured and rich, and her daughter Helga thinks that she is more educated and just generally more brilliant than other people. On page 6, we see the Bible salesman come around. The Bible salesman is the opposite of Helga because he likes to present himself as being lesser than other people. And we'll get to more of that tomorrow. All right, we're starting back with page 6 of Good Country People. This is where the action really starts in. When the Bible salesman comes up to Miss Hopewell's door. Miss Hopewell immediately characterizes the Bible salesman as being a good country person. Automatically, she makes some assumptions about him based on the way that he's talking to her and trying to sell her Bibles. She assumes that he's good-natured, that he's slow, that he's simple, And she's at first trying to get rid of him. But when he realizes that she's trying to get rid of him, he starts to say, "Oh, you think you're better than me? Just because I'm a slow, simple country boy?" And she gets all indignant. "I don't think I'm better than anybody." And she invites him to stay for dinner just to prove how much she's willing to lower herself, quote unquote, down to the level of a good country person. All right. The country boy, when he comes in, he starts to talk to her in a dialect. He is using his accent to try to emphasize his good-naturedness. The fact that he's just a simple old country boy, nothing that can harm you. And he totally lies to her in this way, and she totally believes it. So he says, "Lady, I've come to speak of serious things." She invites him in, and he says, "Mrs. Hopewell, I know you believe in Christian service." He always says Christian, like that. And she says, "Well, yes," because she doesn't want her appearance to appear that she's not a Christian. "Well, yes, of course." He says, "I know you're a good woman. Friends have told me." So he's trying to appear earnest and sincere and genuine. He's trying to flatter her. And Mrs. Hopewell says, "Well, what are you selling?" And he's up front. He says, "Bibles. I'm selling Bibles." And she, at first, says she's not interested. He continues, "Lady, if you're a Christian, the Word of God ought to be in every room in the house besides the heart. I know you're a Christian because I can see it in every line of your face." She tries to get out of his way. "Oh, dinner's burning, I really have to go." And eventually it turns out that she ends up inviting him to the dinner table. She says, "Good country people are the salt of the earth. We all have different ways of doing it. It takes all kinds to make the world go round. That's life." And so she invites him because she doesn't want to appear that she thinks she's better than other people. Now, when he gets to the dinner table, Helga rolls her eyes at him. She's not very impressed with his good Christian way. But eventually, by page 9, Joy, or Helga, is observing sidewise how he handles his knife and his fork, and he would dart a keen, appraising glance at the girl. So they start to flirt over the dinner table, Helga and this Bible salesman. Helga, who has a doctorate in philosophy, is sort of undercover flirting with a 20-something-year-old door-to-door Bible salesman who is going on and on about how much of a Christian he is. So after dinner, she has to clean up the dishes, and then she walks him out to the road, and they continue to talk for a couple minutes. Her mother sees this, and she's completely taken aback. What could my rude, mean, indignant daughter have said to this Bible salesman? Well, it turns out, if we skip through a couple pages of dialogue and more conversation, on page 11, she and the Bible salesman have come to an agreement that they are going to meet the very next day, and they're going to go for a walk. Helga's about 30 years old, and the Bible salesman is in his 20s. He's flirting with her in his simple country boy way, and he says this is the way he decides to flirt with her. This is how strange he is. For almost a minute he didn't say anything, and then on what seemed to be an insuck of breath, he whispered, "You ever ate a chicken that was 2 days old?" That's a flirt. That's him flirting. The girl looked at him stonily. He might have just put this question up for consideration at the meeting of a philosophical association. "Yes," she presently replied, as if she had considered it from all angles. "It must have been mighty small," he said triumphantly, and shook all over with laughter. He's giggling. He's trying to flirt with her. Obviously, he is making himself seem less dangerous, and Helga is really attracted to that because she wants to be the dangerous influence on his life. She sees herself as being above him, And she likes that sense of control that it's giving her. For once in her life, she's able to lord something over another person. So he says, "How old are you?" And she answers, 17, which is an out-and-out lie. She is not 17 years old. This lady is a doctorate of philosophy who lives at home with her mother because in this day and age, she has a wooden leg, and in this day and age, she is sort of an outcast of her own society. The Bible salesman, at the same time, is also stereotyping Huldah. He's attracted to her because she has something wrong with her. And he feels that she must be brave and sweet if she is able to live with that sort of physical ailment that she has. "You're a brave, sweet little thing, and I liked you the minute I seen you walk in the door." He also feels like he's lording something over her. So we have this relationship that's budding, is built entirely on lies and power and manipulation. Here at the end of the page, we get to see the omniscient narrator, one who can hear the thoughts of every character in the story, go into Hulda's frame of mind. And that night, she fantasizes about him. She imagines that she seduces him, that they sleep together, and that she then has to deal with his sense of guilt. Because, of course, being a good Christian, good country people, he obviously feels terrible about the fact that he has had sex with this woman. They're not married or in a relationship. And so Huldah likes that sense of power, feeling that she can have something over him, that she can affect his life in such a serious way. They meet up the next day. They go on a walk, and they're going to try to find somewhere that they can kind of be alone, away from Mrs. Hopewell, Hulda's mother. And here, the Bible salesman is deflecting. She says, "Hey, why'd you bring your suitcase today? You're not selling Bibles. We're going on a date, so why does he need a suitcase?" He deflects and changes the subject. He doesn't answer it. He's giving her a lie. He says, "You can never tell when you're going to need the Word of God, Huldah." And they continue on. She accepts it because, after all, he is a trustworthy, good country man. When they get into the barn, they decide to go up into, what's it called? The loft. They go into the loft of the barn. And Huldah, despite her wooden leg, is able to make it up there. They start to get a little romantic, a little touchy-feely, and he says, "You've got to say you love me. Before we do what we're about to do, you have to say that you love me." Again, the Bible salesman is trying to convey that he's a genuine, sweet, caring person, and that he's in this for the right reasons, because he loves her. So he kind of pressures Huldah into saying that she does love him, and she eventually gives in. Alright, after Huldah admits that in a way she does love the Bible salesman, he says, "Okay, so prove it." So he's making her prove to him that she's not lying. He's on a quest for truth in this moment. He says, "Show me where your wooden leg joins on." And Huldah is very indignant about this. She doesn't like to acknowledge that her leg makes her different from other people, even though it's blatantly obvious from the way that she stomps around the house. She is self-conscious about it. It says she was as sensitive about her artificial leg as a peacock is about his tail. No one ever touched it but her. So at first she refuses, and this is where he senses that she's lying to him. He says, "I know it. I known it. You're just playing me for a sucker." And because she wants this though so badly, she says, no, it joins on at the knee. Why do you care so much?" So eventually, she does decide that it's worth it to show him where her wooden leg joins on. So he's thrilled. She teaches him how to put it on the stump and take it off. And he says, see, with a delighted child's face, now I can do it myself. Again, he is making himself seem silly or less than Helga in a way that makes her really attracted to him. Now this is where I circled in yellow these places where the tides start to turn, because all of a sudden the Bible salesman is getting the sense of power over Helga, and Helga is releasing some power. Before, Helga was always the one in control. Helga is the one who accepted his request to go on this date. Helga is the one who led him into the loft. Helga is the one who fantasized about taking his virginity. Helga is the one who wanted to have total and complete control. And the Bible salesman has always been trying to make himself seem lesser than in her eyes. But now all of a sudden the powers start to change. The tides start to shift. Now Helga says, put it back on. And she says, not yet. Leave it off for a while. You got me instead. And she's really uncomfortable with this. She wants her leg to be back on. But she lets it stay for a moment. Eventually she says, okay, put it back on me now. And he deflects. So this is another type of lie. He says, wait, let's just relax. And he opens up his suitcase, where yesterday there were Bibles. Today there is a pocket flask of whiskey, a pack of cards, and a small blue box with printing on it. This product to be used only for the prevention of disease. And the reading between the lines, the inference we can make is that this is a box of condoms. He has a pack of cards with obscene pictures on the back of them, and he has alcohol. So here we have some round characterization. We have some round characterization of the Bible salesman, because no longer is he pretending to be good country people, just a simple Christian. Now he's become a round character, one who has things on both sides of the spectrum that weigh against each other. We're on page 18 now. Helga is starting to realize the lies that he has told her. She says, aren't you just good country people? And he says, yeah, but it ain't held me back none. I'm as good as you any day of the week. So again, he's assuming the power in this situation. She's desperate for that power back. Give me my leg. And he pushes it further away with his foot. Oh, let's just have a good time. He won't give her back the leg. Now, Helga realizes her mistake in that she flatly characterized the Bible salesman. She did not realize that he could have more elements to his being than the superficial good country people persona that she and her mother have characterized him as. Eventually, this all comes to a head. She's screaming, give me back my leg, and she makes a jump for it, but he runs away from her advances. He opens up the suitcase and puts her leg inside it. So here, the Bible salesman is revealing his out-and-out lie. Very obviously admitting that he's been lying to her face the whole time. He says, I've gotten a lot of interesting things this way. One time I got a woman's glass eye. You needn't think that you're going to catch me, because Pointer ain't really my name. I use a different name at every house I go at. And I don't stay nowhere for long. And I'll tell you another thing, Helga, he says, using the name as if he didn't think much of it. You ain't so smart. I've been believing in nothing ever since I was born. So he tells this doctorate of philosophy that even though she thinks she's smart and advanced, she is nothing compared to him, because this good country boy has been believing in nothing like she does his whole entire life. He's got a lot of experience on her in this regard. And then at the end of the story, we see Mrs. Hopewell and Mrs. Freeman, the woman who lies and the woman who has been characterized as good country people. They're on the back pasture digging up onions, and they see the Bible salesman walk out from the hills where he's left Helga in the barn and walk toward the highway. Miss Hopewell says, well, that looks like that nice, dull young man that tried to sell me a Bible yesterday. He must have been selling to them Negroes back in there. He was so simple. But I guess the world would be better off if we were all that simple. Of course, the question we have to ask ourselves is, would it really? Mrs. Freeman, the good country person, Mrs. Freeman's gaze drove forward and just touched him before he disappeared under the hill. Then she returned her attention to the evil-smelling onion shoot she was lifting from the ground. "Some can't be that simple," she said. "I know I never could." So the irony here is that truly she is that simple, at least in the way that Mrs. Hopewell has characterized her. So we have to wonder, is Mrs. Hopewell right in her characterization of Mrs. Freeman? Or is Mrs. Hopewell wrong, and she has flatly characterized Mrs. Freeman just like she did the Bible salesman? Is there more to Mrs. Freeman than might meet the eye? So in this story, we have elements of realistic everyday life. We have issues of feminism. We have characters who blatantly lie to one another. And eventually we have just one character who really gets what he wants. The Bible salesman is able to make away with the prosthetic that Hulga uses and depends on in her everyday life. Now, the Bible salesman is obviously not the only man who is propagating lies. Mrs. Hopewell was lying. She uses facades and stereotypes. Hulga is lying. She uses out-and-out lies. She uses, let's see, what else? She ignores the plain facts. She operates on a stereotype of good countrymen. The Bible salesman uses flattery. The Bible salesman puts up a facade. And only one character really gets what they want in the end. So the question that you need to be thinking about as you're considering your prompt for tomorrow is, does accepting the fact that lying has a place and a time, that it can sometimes work in your advantage? Like in the Bible salesman's case, the lying is the only thing that got him the prize that he sought. So in this story, lying did have a place and a time. It served a purpose for the Bible salesman. Does that indicate a moral issue? Is it okay that the Bible salesman used a lie to get what he wanted? Is it okay that as a society we say that certain types of lies are alright, like a white lie, and then other types of lies are terrible and that we shouldn't propagate them? You're going to be writing an essay in which you take a position on the societal effects of lying. So you're either going to argue that it's a cultural cancer that leads to moral garbage, or you're going to argue that the societal effects can be positive in a profound way. You're going to use the characters in Good Country People to support your hypothesis, whether it is one side or the other side. There's evidence from the short story for both directions. You're also able to use the essay from the Patterns book, if you would like, your own personal experiences with lying or being lied to, and then observations about the world around you, culture, history, etc. Good luck!